Support for 10,000 Things comes from Third Place Books. With 3 store locations in Seattle, Washington, Third Place Books offers a wide selection of books, gifts, and over 250 author readings a year, in-store or online at thirdplacebooks.com.
Hi, everyone. We wanted to tell you about a new show we are loving, the Culture Study Podcast with Anne Helen Peterson. It's a show about exploring the nooks and crannies of the culture that surrounds you. Each week, Anne and a super smart co-host answer listener questions about the stuff they find interesting and perplexing, like, why do clothes suck now? Is Paw Patrol propaganda, or is it not that deep? And what's the deal with everyone I know getting a divorce? Like Anne's tremendously popular newsletter, the Culture Study Podcast is funny, insightful, and kind of weird, and it's guaranteed to help you become the most interesting person at parties. Listen to Culture Study Podcast every Wednesday, wherever you get your shows.
When we use the words Asian American, what often comes to mind are people of East Asian descent. But within this monolithic term, many subgroups become invisible or misunderstood. Their colonial histories are often overlooked, unknown, or simply disregarded. For many of us, visibility can be elusive. As a Taiwanese American person with a very specific cultural and political identity, I'm frequently lumped into being simply Chinese. And it probably wasn't until the rise in popularity of bubble tea or when the Taiwanese dumpling house Din Tai Fung made a splash that people began to register that Taiwanese is not in fact Thai, but of Taiwan. Shara Amlag faced a similar moment of public exposure from a food trend. She put Filipino culture and identity in the spotlight through her imaginative use of ube, a humble violet-hued yam that's native to the Philippines. Ube is distinct from the purple taro root widely known to foodies, thanks to Japanese and Hawaiian cuisines. In the Philippines, ube is found in pandesal, a purple-colored bread roll, used in jams and as an ice cream flavor. It's everywhere. Yet here in the United States, it was known for decades as an ethnic specialty ingredient. That is, until Shara made it the star of her celebrated hood-famous cheesecake. Shara Amlag and her partner Gio founded the hood-famous bake shop in the Chinatown International District. Ube Cheesecake is their signature offering. It's a uniquely Filipino-American dessert, born in Seattle. Initially, people called it Shara's hood-famous cheesecake because you had to know Shara to get a piece of it. The cheesecake is bright purple with a marbleized finish on top. It's showy and comes in personal and shareable sizes. It's delicious. And it has single-handedly changed Shara's life. From getting the attention of Chef Marcus Samuelson on a show No Passport Required to earning Shara a James Beard Foundation semi-finalist nomination. Ube Cheesecake has brought her and the Filipino community a new level of recognition and respect. This is 10,000 Things, a podcast about modern-day artifacts of Asian American life and the stories they reveal. I'm Xinyi Pai. Today, Ube Cheesecake.
Support for 10,000 Things comes from Third Place Books. With 3 store locations in Seattle, Washington, Third Place Books offers a wide selection of books, gifts, and over 250 author readings a year, in-store or online at thirdplacebooks.com.
Seattle has a Chinatown, Little Saigon, and historic Nihon Machi, but parts of the community have been slow to acknowledge or embrace the vibrant histories and contributions of Filipinos to our community. From cannery workers to farm labor union organizers, the city's original Manongs played a major role in shaping history. Walk around the CID and you'll see a giant Chinese-style gate marking the entrance to the neighborhood on King Street. But you'll only find one small public kiosk that mentions Filipinos in local history. As a result, Filipinos can sometimes feel like invisible Asians. Before coming to Seattle, Shara spent the early part of her life in the Philippines, where she ate ube all the time.
My relationship to it was really informed because it was my mom's favorite dessert, and it was my favorite dessert because it was my mom's favorite dessert, and she made me make it so much.
Shara's mom would often make ube halaya, a kind of caramelized ube.
Milk, sugar, and ube. And you just boil that all together. But the part that makes it so special is to get the consistency, you have to just stir and stir and stir.
Shara's mom would get the ingredients going on the stove. She'd pull a chair up to the stove and have young Shara step on it and put a wooden spoon in her hand.
She'd say, okay, Shara, you get the fun part of stirring it forever.
When Shara moved to Seattle, she wanted to make sweets, so she learned to bake. She mastered popular American desserts and often made lemon bars or cookies for friends and family. And when Shara started her family with her husband Gio, she also wanted to pass on her Filipino roots. Back in 2013, Shara and Gio wanted to take their kids to the Philippines on an exposure trip to reconnect and understand their culture. So they had to raise some money, and they wanted to do it in a fun way. They both love hosting and eating food with friends. So they decided to put together a pop-up dinner party. These were trending in many cities. Shara and Gio were just hanging out and being themselves, living their culture and celebrating their cultural identities through food and sharing that love with others. Gio was in charge of making the meal, and Shara oversaw desserts. Shara Googled some ube recipes and made her first cheesecake.
First cheesecake was disgusting. It was not disgusting. I mean, it didn't taste good.
Shara went back to the basics. She had to break the whole dessert down to its essential building blocks.
For me, the rule of thumb is always, if you're going to experiment, you got to do the traditional really well before you start altering it. So I took a step back and really made, for me, what my perfect New York style cheesecake was. And then I started integrating ube into it.
Shara had a deadline, but it didn't take her long to get the recipe just right. A few experiments with culinary ratios and her recipe evolved into something new and original and delicious. The cheesecake debuted at Shara and Gio's second pop-up, and guests loved it.
I think people were first kind of enamored with the color.
But they were also vibing with the mashup of cultures, something American combined with something recognizably Filipino. It was two identities in one. On the Pinoy side, it was loud, colorful, proud of its heritage, and born from a desire to be shared in community. On the American side, it was buttery, creamy, and based on an iconic New York confection. It was a mixed-race dessert. The next month at their pop-up, people showed up asking for the Ube Cheesecake, and then again the next month. It earned a nickname, Shara's Hood-famous cheesecake. The neighborhood wanted a piece. They wanted their friends and family to try it. They would come to dinner specifically for the cheesecake they'd heard so much about.
And we would have to tell them, sorry, that was October of last year. And that made us realize, oh, this is something that people really want to try.
And so Shara realized this cheesecake wasn't a one-off. She started baking the cheesecake and selling it herself at small scale. Shara and Gio had a supportive community of family and friends who were buying their cheesecake and sharing it. And of course, around this time, Instagram was also exploding, and the cheesecake was a visual knockout.
If it wasn't a good cheesecake, I think they probably would have been like, that was neat. But it's a darn good cheesecake.
A beautiful and delicious cheesecake was unstoppable. It kept picking up steam. And Shara started to take this seriously. There was real demand for her product. She was baking nights and weekends to fill orders. And then Uwaji Maya happened. Uwaji Maya is a very popular regional grocery store in the Pacific Northwest and a purveyor of specialty Asian American foods. Uwaji's took a huge interest in Shara's cheesecake and put in a big order.
I was super naive. I thought I could just bake on the weekends. It would be a side hustle, and I would just deliver the cheesecakes myself.
The first order for Uwaji Maya was significant, the most cheesecake she'd ever made at once. She had to alter the recipe a bit to make it easier to produce at scale.
Honestly, I don't remember how many I made, but I thought it would last a week.
She made her first delivery to Uwaji Maya.
It lasted 2 hours. I got the call and they said, can you drop off some more tomorrow? And I said, I don't have any backstock. I just made a big batch and I dropped it off. And that's when the moving train that never stops started.
There was serious demand for the hood-famous Ube Cheesecake. It was like a limited edition book or art print, and everyone wanted a piece, especially Filipinos and Asian American foodies.
I was playing. I was having fun. I thought it was delicious. Little did I know that people would actually find it to be such a meaningful dessert because of what it represented.
Ube Cheesecake represented this moment of Filipino arrival in popular culture. Being accepted, visible, and celebrated for the place where you and your ancestors are from. Seeing the flavors of your motherland all over the internet and on dessert menus around town and sold everywhere, from the Chinatown International District to Ballard, the Scandinavian epicenter of Seattle.
I think people really started to see themselves visible in this interesting way through food.
Of course, not everyone was enamored with the cheesecake. Some people didn't understand it, like some of the aunties and elders who preferred traditional to novel. But for Shara, that was okay.
Flavors and food in particular is a very visceral experience for folks.
Shara remembers one moment that made her cry, not because of the cheesecake's flavor, but because of how it was seen and valued.
My first bad Yelp review. I just remember somebody leaving a remark like, how could you charge so much for a cheesecake? And they were talking about our price, which was $4.99.
This was deflating. Shara valued the labor and the ingredients that went into her cheesecake. And she knew her prices were not more than other similar products, which actually often cost more.
Then it just got to, people expect that if you are purchasing something that comes from an Asian cuisine, that you don't pay that much for it.
Food isn't cheap, and some communities have undervalued their own labor for too long. Like the $5 banh mi sandwich or the $10 bowl of pho. Equating cheap with Asian cuisine is no longer valid. In fact, our cultural cuisines are an innovative and historic contribution to the evolution of American cuisine.
Somebody's putting out not just a piece of food, but sharing their culture with you. That has value too, right? And so I struggled with that a lot. The value of what people were willing to pay.
Shara says the early critiques helped her develop a thicker skin. Not everything is going to be for everyone. And the praise she's heard is much louder than the criticism. But Shara and Gio knew that if they were going to open a brick-and-mortar location, they would be representing Filipino culture. And they wanted to do it with their community around them, with collaboration leading over competition, and the idea that more than one person from an ethnic group can make it. So they gathered together with their friends to speak what they wanted out loud.
We talked about how we don't want to replicate the crab mentality, that for us to build a culture, we need to be the ones to continue to uplift one another and not be the ones to say, oh, we're in competition with each other. I knew that I wanted to build a community of peers and colleagues and help shape what that community looks like.
Shara and Gio brought this collective mentality with them as they opened their hood-famous big shop in the CID in 2019. They hung historic photos of Filipinos living, working, and playing here in the CID. Inside the bakery, they sell the Ube Cheesecake alongside Ube Lattes, cassava cake, and calamansi dessert bars. And they didn't wait for permission from anyone to announce that they make their home in historic Filipino town. They were proud to claim it for themselves, and they put it on their t-shirts.
Filipino town was something that historically we know had been there. And so for us, a part of it is if no one else is going to make this more visible for us, let's do it ourselves. Let's make some merch.
Now, 10 years later, Ube is everywhere.
For the uninitiated, there's a growing purple phenomenon.
Is this it?
Yeah.
It looks very pretty.
Hi everyone, in today's video we are trying every Ube product from Trader Joe's.
Ube. It's a yam native to the Philippines. Deep purple in color that's suddenly all the rage.
The legacy of Ube Cheesecake is in its innovation and boldness. It's bringing together of two cultures in a hybrid identity that pays homage to the contributions that Filipinos are making to creating a new culture. That cultural pride has opened a space to reclaim and assert a present-day Filipino town, a place that only existed for years in memory and the imagination, but is now finally coming into being through projects like Hood Famous, Filipino Town Magazine, and official city recognition of Filipino Town. Flavors adapt and perceptions change so that a thing that once seemed exotic or novel becomes part of the mainstream. That's how it was with Ube. Cher's Cheesecake gave Filipino culture greater visibility by combining a quintessentially Western food with a very Filipino flavor to assert how the identity of American cuisine can evolve and expand to make room for brown swagger and beloved community. Next week's object is a loquat tree. 10,000 Things is produced by KUOW in Seattle, a member of the NPR network. Our host, writer, and creator is me, Shinyi Pai. Whitney Henry Lester produced this episode. Jim Gates is our editor. The show art is designed by Eason Yang. Original music is by Tomo Nakayama. Our production team includes Michaela Giannotti-Boyle, Hans Tweit, Amelia Peacock, Brendan Sweeney, and Marshall Eisen. If you like this podcast, KUOW has a lot more great audio for you. Search KUOW in your podcast app and see what piques your interest. KUOW podcasts are made possible through community funding. You can support 10,000 Things and other KUOW podcasts by making a donation of any size at KUOW.org. There's a link in the show notes. And as always, thanks for listening.
I'm Rachel Martin. You probably know how interview podcasts with famous people usually go. There's a host, a guest, and a light Q&A. But on Wildcard, we have ripped up the typical script. It's a new podcast from NPR where I invite actors, artists, and comedians to play a game using a special deck of cards to talk about some of life's biggest questions. Listen to Wildcard wherever you get your podcasts, only from NPR.